Center for Immunology, and I've been a big supporter of this program for many years. And I would say I'm probably one of Chris's most avid students over the years. And so we have Chris Carlson here and his colleague Brian from Narrative Prose, and their job is to give us some information about the art and, it turns out, science of public speaking. And I can say from my own experience, it's helped my public speaking in two ways. Once I think my message became more memorable, my audience remembered what I said, maybe 48 hours later. And the other thing is that the public speaking became less terrifying and actually approaching something like fun. I'm not sure I've quite gotten there yet. But so I ask you to have an open mind and listen to what these guys have to say, and I think you'll, every time I hear Chris and Brian, there's another couple nuggets that I think you'll find useful. So take it away.
Good. Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome, everyone, to the 2017-2018 edition of these seminars. I see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm excited to be here. We're rebranding these seminars as the R.E.D seminars, which was up there, but now it's not. Relational Experience Development. And we are actually quite excited that we were forced to come up with a catchy name, because we'll be relying on that acronym quite a bit today. Today is special for quite a few other reasons. We're welcoming a new partner to these seminars, the Masonic Cancer Center. So welcome to those of you who are joining us today. The purpose of these seminars, as Mark touched on, is to help you in a very practical way connect more effectively with the audiences you need to connect with by effectively leveraging the habits you already have to connect with your audiences, by connecting more effectively with your ideas and your own personality. And we'll be touching on that quite a bit, those three levels of connection. These seminars are designed around brave volunteers who will be working with us, and we'll be touching on that later today, and that will be the template for the rest of the seminars, as well as some small group exercises. So all participants will be allowed to, and encouraged rather, to try out some of the exercises in very small and non-threatening ways. Don't worry. The volunteers are much braver. They're going to take some of our feedback based on your input as an audience, and we're going to try to shift their delivery so that they can craft their perception. But before we do that, today we're going to do two extra aspects that is not going to be repeated in the 6 seminars. This is the first of 6. And today, we're going to take some time on 2 separate sections to set the stage a little bit more precisely, mostly in honor of our new partners, but it's something that we have done incrementally with the Center for Immunology over the years, and so we want to do it more precisely. And the first thing that we're going to do for about half an hour is we're going to walk through our assumptions and our approaches very specifically and very deliberately. The people in this room, and I think Brian and I are included, in what is often termed as knowledge workers. We make our living from our ideas, our opinions, our insights. And as knowledge workers, we have a highly developed faculty for rationality, reason, logic. And so it's very understandable that when topics of emotion, intuition, habits that you're unaware of are brought up, there's a degree of discomfort, unfamiliarity, suspicion. And so we're going to be very, very specific with the assumptions and conclusions that we're going to be offering up to you. So we will walk through those. And we're very proud that over the years, those, I'm supposed to bring markers by the way, so good thing I did that. Our work is based on a significant body of scientific literature, and we'll be touching on that today. Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman's work, and also Anders Ericsson's work in the development of expertise. So we'll touch on that a little later today. And before we do that, the other thing that we're going to take some extra time today doing is introducing ourselves. Introducing, not, hey, my favorite thing is this. No, we're not going to do that. We want to know more precisely what it is that you're trying to do, how you're going about doing it, and why you're doing it, so that we can ground our work together in as much practical impact as possible. So that's where we're going to spend a little bit of time until just around half past doing that. Then we're going to segue into walking through our approaches. And then last but not least, we're going to invite Sylvia up to present, and we're going to give her some feedback, and then we're going to invite you in some small group exercises. Sound good? All right. So I would like to begin the introduction process by us introducing ourselves a little bit so you know who the heck it is you're hearing this from. My name is Chris Carlson. I'm the president of a company called Narrative Pros, whose mission is to bring professionals like yourselves together with artistic professionals, other professional communicators, so that we can benefit from best practices. And I want to introduce you to Brian Sostek, my dear friend and Narrative Pros associate, and have him introduce himself and our work a little bit, and then we'll get to know you a little bit.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming. Appreciate your being here. We know for some of you this is your first time, and it may be kind of an unfamiliar experience, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Chris and I have done this a lot with a lot of different people. Knowledge workers, as we said, people in the world of science, business, and the arts as well. Chris and I, we met actually at Carleton College and started our parallel tracks in the performing arts there, doing improv comedy. And we've both pursued professional, sorry, I'm gonna go over like that, so I can adjust. We've both pursued professional tracks in the performing arts world. So a lot of the basis of what we're going to be doing today and over the next 5 sessions is based on the best practices of what we've discovered works in the performing arts as actors with over 50 years of combined professional experience. Now, at this point, yes. I also worked as a dancer and a singer when the casting director doesn't listen too carefully. So we, as I said, we met at Carleton, and one of the things that we both discovered about one another, and we've pursued, and we were just talking to Mark about this, is that we also have a very strong interest in athletics and physical functionality. And as a choreographer and a dancer, I have a particular interest in this and how it relates to presentation and how it relates to the way your brain and your body work together. So one of the things we'll be touching on periodically is that relationship. And we also have continued our interest in critical thinking. Chris pursued a law degree at Hamlin, and I have developed part of my career as a writer and director, choreographer as well, but also as an educator, specifically most recently working with gifted and talented kids, trying to get them to develop critical thinking skills at an early age. So what else can I say? I think that probably covers enough for now.
That's pretty good. And one of the reasons we want to let you know where we're coming from so that you can take our advice in context. We hold ourselves out as peers, not as experts that know everything about communication, but rather we make our living off of connecting with audiences in the same way that I believe you make your living off of that. And so we feel best when we approach the people we work with as colleagues side by side. Let's figure out how we can tackle this. Our advice is grounded in, if I was in that position, this is how I would approach it. Okay? Does that make sense? And it's also important, I think, some of the aspects and perspectives that Brian touched on are very central to our work. First of all, the performance aspect is central, it's core. But also the physical aspect and how we develop different skills over time. That has become a huge tool for us to communicate to people who don't share an artistic background. How we learn how to do different skills, whether it's cross-country skiing or basketball or golf or highlight, who knows. Anyone can learn anything, including some of the skills that we're talking about today. There's very little that is unattainable, if anything. So now it's your turn. Ready to go? No. What we want to do, and we found this to be quite a productive exercise, we want to quickly, just informally, ask you some very general questions. It might be a bit reductivist, but indulge me. So please, and there's definitely no wrong answers because you know all the answers, but even if you think someone else might disagree with you, go ahead and offer it up. What is it, if you had to describe to somebody, and maybe you often still do, what is it that you do? What is it that on a day-to-day basis you do? Anyone? It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, you obviously don't make roller skates, you do what?
Let's say in the realm of your scientific work.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different, I'm sure, within this group, a lot of different levels and jobs and titles, and so, but very broadly, what is it that you do?
Okay, you're stuck in an
Research.
elevator. with
Research,
something-
okay.
Okay.
So you conduct research, excellent. What else do you do? You teach other people, wonderful. What else?
Try to answer questions.
Wonderful. More broadly, you try to find out an answer to a question. Very good. What else? What are some other things? You teach, you research answers to questions.
Read email.
You read email. You do things to get other things done, the business of business. You read email.
I try to convince people to fund me.
Convince people to fund you. Excellent. And that's central. In other words, that's where we were going to go with this, is in order to do research, in order to answer questions, we have to do some things we might not like. Answer emails. Request funding. What else? What are other aspects that you do? What is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning? Or
Discovery.
Discovery, what kind of discovery?
Biological discoveries.
Biological discovery. And these discoveries have value to you because they're new and interesting to answer a question. And they also, do they have a greater value?
Hopefully for human health.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this is one of the reasons I wanted you to answer some of these questions. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to work with groups like yours is we're not just discovering new ways to make people spend $1,000 on a phone. You know, that has some value to society, unless you break it down to $280 to fix it. I don't know. But the things that you're finding out have huge impact, don't they? So what motivates you is finding new discoveries having to do with our biology that have an impact, a beneficial impact to society. What else?
Advocate science.
Say that again?
Advocate science.
Advocate science. So you're advocating for a philosophy in which it's fact-based, where there are right and wrong answers, where it can be reproven, repeated, discovered.
Yeah.
Yeah, not fake news. I mean, I think that's
Alternative.
that's significant. Yeah, alternative facts. What else?
Prepare
So
publication.
you work on alternative facts.
I work on alternative.
Publication.
Prepare publication.
Prepare publication. So these things start to blend, and you can see how there's a pattern here. We're doing many different things in the furtherance of others. And some of you stop at different points. There's a different focus at different points in your career, at different job levels. Prepare for publication after doing research, answering questions that have to do with discovery to affect other people, that is made possible by things like funding. What are some other things that make your work possible?
Communication.
Say?
Communication.
Communication, absolutely. How about fundamentally, how did you get where you are today?
Mentors.
Mentors, learning from other people, the connection that you have with them.
Collaboration.
Collaboration, excellent.
How about-
So, go ahead.
Dissecting mice and pipetting.
Dissecting mice and then doing what to them?
Like pipetting or
Pipetting them.
monotonous every day.
So it's a very monotonous, so it's work that is in furtherance of something else. Is that right?
Sure, yeah.
Or you,
It's a big part of our
okay.
day.
I just want to, is that what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
Okay, great. No, it's great. Great. So doing that work, working with actual physical things to try to find out some of these answers. Let me ask you this. Who here doesn't have a job? Everyone here? So you don't I feel you, brother. No. You all have a job because at some point someone believed in you. Who interviewed for a job? Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, I was leading it. What? You got a job just placed right in? No, I'm teasing. At some point, you had an exchange with somebody, didn't you? And I know that's a huge feature at some point in your career, and it continues on. Who wants a different job, maybe? Nobody? Everyone's content? Oh, you got a couple people? Okay, excellent. Who wants more funding? Okay, great, yeah, there you go. Who wants more discovery? Excellent, okay. Okay, I think you're starting to see what we're trying to get from you is, go ahead.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about what really inspires you. We've heard about what you do in various manifestations. We've talked about how you do that, some of the ways that you are actually able to do that. And I'm curious about what drives you. Why do you do this? What is it that inspires you, gets you out of bed, as Chris said, in the morning?
Curiosity.
Curiosity,
Great.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Interactions with patients.
Great. And tell me, describe the interactions that are inspiring.
Talking to a 5-year-old that says, I don't want to have type 1 diabetes anymore, because they don't understand the biological consequences or how they got it.
Great. That sounds, I know it's inspiring, it sounds sad. What are you able to answer? Or what are you able to do with that question?
That's why we do the research, so we
I
can
see.
get rid of
I
it.
see. You're inspired by that situation
Yeah.
to help answer the question more specifically. Okay, I understand. Great. Anyone else? What's painful? What keeps you up at night? What bothers you? What do you want to do? Eliminate or reduce in your life? Emails. We got that. That was clear how you delivered that. Well done. Stuck in my mind. Less emails. Got it. Anyone else? Things that you
Something
want?
realistic, I mean. Like solving type 2 by type.
That's the blue seminars, which is separate. It's a companion program. Anyone? Problems, pains? No?
No results.
No results?
Wrong results.
Wrong results. So in other words, you go through an entire process and you get results that are at the very least not helpful, if not wrong. And they might be wrong because of
I made a mistake.
you made a mistake. There you go. So self-error, human error.
So why once you've encountered wrong results, what gets you to go back and try again?
Curiosity
Curiosity.
and self-improvement.
Self-improvement?
Self-improvement.
Right.
A desire to be better?
Yes.
So on that topic, let me ask you, how many of you are happy with how things are going now? How many of you want to get better? Great. How many of you are doing something about it? Excellent. Because you're here, right? And I want to, what are some of the things that you're doing to get better? What are some of the things that you do?
Read the literature.
Read literature, learning more. Great. Questioning your approaches, learning from others. Excellent. What else? What else? What are some other? Go ahead.
Trying to be more focused.
Being more focused.
So that you make less human error.
Great. So trying to be probably more present to the mice dissecting and the pipetting, or whatever it is, so you don't pipette a mouse and dissect a. I cut you off. What is that?
Like while just being focused, that you are not distracted by anything else and you are just focusing so that there's no you have not missed out any step or
Great.
anything, like you're following all the things correctly. And
Wonderful. Anything else? Steps that you're taking? Over there. Yep.
ask for help. If you
Asking
have
for
a-
help.
If you have a problem or you don't know something.
How is it difficult to ask for help?
Sometimes
Yes.
yes.
Why?
Because maybe you think you should know everything,
Right.
but you
Right.
don't, so.
When you ask for help, what makes it a rewarding process? What makes the act of asking for help easier or better?
Maybe like finding a person that is like willing to help you and doesn't judge you or has the time for you.
Great, great, wonderful. Anyone else?
Practice.
Practice? Oh, sorry.
Seminars.
Seminars. Great, great. So going through something again and again, and again, there's, I see a parallel with not being distracted, a focus, a presentness to the process itself. Excellent, excellent.
You have to be thinking all the time. So
You have to, critical engagement with the
gotta
world.
keep your brain
Yeah.
involved
Wonderful,
always.
wonderful. And the flip side of that is when you're not engaged, when you're not thinking, when you're thinking about how many emails you have to answer or how cold it is or something, you're going to give less to what you have at hand, if you're perhaps. Excellent. That's very good. Anything else, Brian?
No, that's great.
Okay, that helps us a lot, because what we want to do is talk in terms of what you're trying to do. And at the beginning, you heard me say that these seminars are an opportunity to find ways to leverage your existing habits to increase the effectiveness of connecting with audiences through your ideas and your presence, your personality. And I think it's safe to say that within these answers here, we have identified several points where there's a face-to-face interaction. And it's my understanding and belief that in this profession, as you've shared with us, and in all of society, the most critical moments are conducted face-to-face. If it's complex or significant, we come face-to-face. And oftentimes, we don't really know why. We're able to add some reasons to it, but just as an example, everyone in this room has a constitutional right to confront your accuser. If you're accused of a crime, the Constitution guarantees the right to confront them, and that's been interpreted by courts to see them face-to-face whenever possible, sometimes video. But why? Well, there's really no other reason other than deep, deep within us, we believe that there's a tremendous amount of information and meaning that comes from meeting with somebody face-to-face. We get something from looking someone in the eyes and understanding who they are. And it's only recently that we've been able to unpack some of those nuances. And this is the job that Brian and I have as professionals, as actors. We take human behavior, deconstruct it, and then reconstruct it in a very intentional, meaningful way. And so a lot of that has been supported by our training with other non-actors has been supported by a lot of the science and research when it comes to how we build these habits. And that's what we're going to explore today. So I want to hopefully invoke this wonderful speaker support system to see if I can do some of my crude diagrams, and if not, we'll have to erase that, but that's okay. We'll see. So I want to start with the core of our acronym, and that is experience, and on that topic of interpersonal experience. And this idea, thank you. No, that's fine. No, please don't. It'd be too long. Interpersonal experience is what I was just talking about. It's getting face-to-face, and we're only now understanding a little bit more about how powerful that is, how deeply innate it is. And I want to briefly point out to you the body of literature that we will be relying on is essentially Daniel Kahneman's work in Thinking Fast and Slow. He describes two systems that we all have that are always at play. And it's significant to point out that one is much more powerful than the other. So powerful, in fact, that we're largely unaware of it. And it's this power and this unawareness that is worth pointing out because it shifts the way that we approach this. So he describes other terms, or another body of knowledge that refers to these as System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the very quick, what can be called top-down thinking. And System 2 is the very deliberate, methodical, bottom-up thinking. Does that make sense? And so, for example, if Brian were to see a math equation over here, 17 times 28, Brian would immediately recognize that as a math equation. He would immediately recognize, with no thought, that it's probably more than 10 less than 1,000. But unless he engages consciously and effortfully into the process of multiplication that he learned as in grade school, he won't get the answer. He has to engage in that System 2 and invoke that. Okay? The trick is, and this is what Kahneman points out, and this is for our purposes where we evoke this, is that we think we conduct our day all consciously and all deliberately. And it turns out that 95% of our behavior and our decision making is actually driven by that unconscious system one. Because we are incredibly lazy biological creatures. If there is a way to save energy, we will. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it actually works quite well. What's difficult is that when we mistake one for the other, when we say, oh no, I'm being completely conscious and deliberate, and in fact you're being driven by an unconscious or preconscious process. And so we point this out because we will constantly be separating out things that you didn't know you were aware of. And most importantly, we will introduce very effortful processes that over time become effortless. So you can migrate from one system to the next. If you've ever been driving and talking to someone and playing with the radio, you're doing something fairly effortless. But when you first were learning how to drive, it was incredibly effortful. Just to give you an example, and this is in his book, and you probably already know this, and so I'm not going to make too big a deal out of this riddle, but it's a good way to point out how powerful these two processes are. Very smart people in this room. Very simple riddle. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 together. The bat is $1 more than the ball. So how much does the ball cost? How much? 10 cents. Yeah. Isn't that right? It's incorrect, but that's your system one saying, this is super easy. He said 10 cents. Come on. Let's move on. 10 cents. No, don't go further. Don't go into algebra. Don't go through that. Move on. And then meanwhile, in the back, and some of you, it's a little bit more attuned. You're like, well, wait a minute. If it was 10 cents, then that would mean that the bat is only 90 cents more. Wait a minute. That can't be right. And then eventually, with some figuring out, you find out that if the ball is 5 cents, then the bat could be $1.05 and still $1 more. But it's these blind spots, these hiccups that we have that are so deep that when we call them out, it's a little discomforting. And some of you are like, oh, that's a stupid riddle. Ooh, I don't like being tricked. We're constantly tricking ourselves all the time. But on the other hand, if Brian sees my face, within 100 milliseconds, he knows tons about me. He knows if I'm a friend or a foe. He knows whether or not I can act upon that. And that is what we want to leverage, is the audience doing that to you as a speaker, whether it's an audience of many, an audience of one, or whether it's just someone that you bump into. Leveraging those 100 milliseconds to be as useful as possible. Developing a habit so that you can more efficiently go about what you want to go about. Okay? So that's the core of our acronym. That's the experience. And so we're here today, meeting face-to-face, to leverage that, to work with it. Celia will be coming up here today. We're going to get input from what you perceive her to be broadcasting as a meaning, as a perception. We're going to give her ways to adjust that. We're going to see what impact that has. And we're going to be bouncing between these two systems. All right, let's go to the second aspect I want to focus on. So the experience is the core, and it's in the middle. Get it? Let me spend a little bit of time on, if we pull the lens out a little bit, and if we look at relational interactions. So any interaction can be boiled down into 3 distinct components. And those components are you, your idea, what it is that you want to convey, the information, the insight, the opinion, and the other person, them. And if we take this, there are fundamentally a number of dynamics if we break this down. So the first fundamental dynamic is that if you have somebody, there's you interact with them all the time. You say, hey, how's it going, Brian? I like your shoes, and I especially like your pants because they're really cool. And they're the same color as pants as mine. And then Brian says something to affirm our connection. He might say,
yeah, they are. I can't believe we probably got them at the same store, in fact. You have good taste.
yeah, see? And we have this bond. We have an overlap. By opposition or in contrast, you could say, hey, what's going on? Hey, dude, how you doing? You know, and someone doesn't say anything. So if you don't talk to someone. So that's just very simple. It's two people relating, okay? The next dynamic that's very fundamental is when you come up with an idea or you internalize something and you think of, oh, gee, I wonder, chocolate and peanut butter, that might be a good combination. And you think about that, and then you think more and more about it, and it has implications with the rest of the world. And you say, well, you would take the peanut butter and you would put it around the chocolate. No, you put the chocolate around the peanut butter. And so your idea expands out into the world, just like your experiments. You have an idea, then it expands out. Okay, so that's the second fundamental dynamic. And the third is, simply the reverse of that, is learning something else. So someone else learns, tell me more about this chocolate and peanut butter plan of yours. My God, it's brilliant! And so they will adopt it and then internalize it. Does that make sense? Super simple, but has some really interesting implications. So if we look at how these interact, if we take a fundamental interaction between an individual and another individual and an idea, there are some interesting implications of how this happens. So the first thing that happens is that the person interacts with you, okay? And this is probably the heart of why I'm drawing these diagrams. This happens first, within 100 milliseconds, as I said before, you are relating to the other person as a human being. You are not relating to their idea simultaneously. That cannot come before this happens. And the research shows that this dominates the second. There's two fundamental exchanges that go on, and that is warmth or trust, and then competency. The competency, the value that someone has, comes only after there's been a determination of some kind of affinity, of trust. Like, oh, you're on my team, you have something, you know, we're together, we're of one people, we're colleagues, we're peers, and what is it that you have to say? Oh, interesting. And this should be intuitive, because if you're talking to someone and you find out they're a total jerk, you're going to have a hard time listening to them. So this is the first dynamic, first and fundamental, and we'll be returning to this again and again. And it's the most overlooked, because, God love us, we're people of ideas. We think that all that needs to happen is someone comes along and discovers our idea. Now, this is exactly what happens with publication. They do. They discover your idea. Now, they might be affected by your prose and your diagrams, but you're not infecting any of that exchange. It's a knowledge exchange. But in these key instances, critical time periods, where you need to convince somebody of something in order to change them in some way, to motivate behavior, this is how it begins. Only after that has begun do you move to the second phase. Once you've established some kind of a rapport, then you're able to move into some kind of exchange of information. This exchange of information, you can see, only takes place once you've established a rapport. So right there, the overlapping circles now show the internalization process the audience is going through as you're able to articulate your idea. Now you can make this hard or you can make this easy. So I got this chocolate, right, and peanut butter, and it's really good, and it's good, it's really great. What? Wait, you lost me. Say it again? Well, the chocolate and the peanut butter. Dude, get it? For kids. What? You know, as opposed to, it's a confection that will sell in the aisle at Target, and people will buy it because they're addicted to sugar, and they love peanut butter and chocolate. It's brilliant! They understand, they internalize the idea. Success is predicated on some kind of grasping or stickiness of your idea, right? And that leads us to the last stage, which is the most important, which is the legacy. Once you've established some kind of rapport, once you've transferred the idea, your idea is only as good as subsequent action. If somebody listens to your research and they say, oh, it's a brilliant idea, I love it, no more email, I love it, it's great. And then they walk out and they're like, I don't know, it seems kind of weird. So what did you just talk about? I don't know, email, some weird idea about email. As opposed to someone talking about, I must be eating a lot of Halloween candy. Someone talking about this whole idea of this chocolate and peanut butter, and it's like, and your wheels start turning, and you then take over the idea, and you can see how it can affect the way you see the world, and it might even motivate behavior for you to go and invest in the Reese's company. So what we have here is the 3 acts of connection. So again, this first act is where people go in 100 milliseconds, but it's fundamental to the rest of the process, where they have to understand that you are a competent person, a nice person, somebody that they want to relate to. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot to be done. And you don't want to spend any time you don't have to, or that's painful, or that's unpleasant. And it's a hard lesson that I learned from Brian, not from Brian, Brian and I have learned from directors. When we go audition, that's what directors are trying to find out, whether they want to be in the room with you. Consciously or unconsciously, they're like, okay, Brian, he's a nice guy. Now let's hear what he has to do. And so it's getting over this threshold first to make your point. Once you get into this, and that is this is a preparation for this process. When you're able to know your point so well that you're able to maximize that time with that person in an effort to drive some kind of behavior. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
What else if you lose one of the connection before you establish the full overlap?
So if at any point there's a problem, you can cure an initial impression. It is possible to overcome. So let's say I meet you in the first 100 milliseconds. This diagram will not work. Let's say I meet you in the first 100 milliseconds and I don't like you. And I listen to you, and so there's barely any overlap. I'm essentially okay standing and listening to you for a little bit, but I'm looking for the quickest exit. I can't wait till someone takes me away from the conversation with this nutball over here. I'm talking to him, and he's like, oh, chocolate, and it's great. And I know I smell a little bit, but, and then you get into this, and you can recover. So, I mean, the circle is obviously idealized, but you can recover that. So it is a dynamic flow that can be cured, but the key requires effort. And since we're misers with our attention and our effort, what happens is as you go on, if you don't establish enough of a foundation, it becomes more and more difficult. The same thing with a point. If I'm understanding your point and it becomes more and more difficult to follow it, I'm going to start to retreat my attention. I'm going to start to pull back. And there's less and less of a chance of having an impact.
If I can just comment here as well, that very short time frame in which you have to establish an initial impression of somebody isn't the only impression they'll get, of course. And we're not just talking about, this person's got great charisma, so I'm going to stay and listen to what they have to say. There are many factors that influence the way a person, two people overlap, find that overlap. And that may have to do with just the way that you speak about your expertise. It may have to do with circumstances beyond your control. But it's not. It starts with that very instantaneous connection, and it builds, as Chris said, dynamically over the course of time, depending on what you have to offer. So, and it's very dynamic.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, this is more complicated probably than you want to get into, but somebody in that interaction has their own preconceived notions about who you are based on how you look.
Mm-hmm.
How do you break through that?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking as a woman in
Yeah.
science, who's often prejudged based on the fact that she's female.
That's a great question, and we're constantly interacting with our environment, which I would define as circumstances beyond our control. We're very limited to change our environment. I could turn the heat up in here, I could change the lights a little bit. But there are a number of factors and preconceived notions that we have to deal with. And so in the preparation phase, so when you're planning for an interaction, as you're just proposed.
And I'm saying this because I've given presentations and I've had people comment and I'm like, where did that come from? And somebody else will say, well, they just had this in their mind that you were this and that's why they interpreted you that way. So I guess for me, one of the issues about public speaking or interacting with people is to get them, how do I?
Beyond that initial impression and bias that they have.
Right.
So I think it's important to acknowledge whatever biases that you're aware of. and you need to work within them as much as you can. There's so much that we don't have control over. And I don't think it's a judicious use of your precious resources to combat a bias head on. And I think that, and for the short term, for the long term, I think it's worthwhile. But on a micro interaction basis, what you need to do is you need to look at the leverage that you do have. The playing field where there is a possibility needs to be assessed beforehand. And you need to imagine it's like, okay, I'm going to talk to a room full of men, and I'm a woman. So gender is going to be an issue. Okay? So is it possible to connect with them? It might not be. And you do the best you can. And in which case we would advise you to make sure that you're okay, that you feel good and safe and you are as much yourself as possible, which is a huge part of this. But there's a level, I believe, where all humans can connect. You have to be a little ingenious. And part of that process, especially on a one-on-one or a small group basis, is to tease out what their interests are, to tease out and to find a common ground and to work backwards off of what they have. We all have, so this overlap isn't predestined either way. And yet at the same time, it's going to be more difficult with some and easier with others. So I've worked with a lot of female clients, and what we try to do is acknowledge, look, there's a stereotype or there's a bias. For example, women are emotional. Well, let's just say that that's a bias that you're fighting against. And so if you were talking impassionately, that might feed into a bias. And so we might say, okay, let's see how we can calibrate this so we don't trigger someone's sensitivity. So we might want to come under that in a way that's still genuine and authentic, but color it less emotional and more logical, and yet still have the same message. So what we try to do, all communication we think of as a dynamic exchange, as a call and response. And so you're starting off with someone throwing the ball at you pretty hard, and so you have to decide how to best get it back so that we can say, hey, we're playing together. But many times, they don't even want to. And at which point, then it's a matter of doing the best that you can with yourself and doing the best that you can with the person. And we've all come to a point where there's like, this argument's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to convert anybody. And so you just have to say, okay, interesting. Wow, that's a fascinating insight about your attitude towards women. Huh. Well, I've got to go now. I'd love to stay around and take some more abuse from you, but I need to preserve my self-worth for people who are a little bit open-minded and believe in science as an actual thing. That's a real thing.
What's your name?
Lisa.
Lisa. It's a nice feminine name. No, I'm just kidding. If anybody...
Before Elvis had his kid named it Lisa, so I was aware of Lisa.
Okay, there you go. Now, Chris and I work in a field where bias is not only rampant, but expected and accepted. And it doesn't feel good. It doesn't, like, I would love to play a leading man once in a while, but I audition with somebody like Chris, and the director goes, nope, thank you.
Because leading men are tall.
Right. But what I've found, I'll just speak from my personal experience, is that first of all, you've got the science to back you up. You've got your expertise. I have my expertise, and after a while, within a field, within colleagues, people start to recognize, okay, actually he can do this. Oh, and he can do this, and he can do this. And eventually, people start to say, actually he can play a leading man, and I got a role at the last year at the R.E.D, for instance, playing a leading man, which was bizarre. And yet it happens, first of all, over time. Second of all, within a group of, a cohort that recognizes the whatever skills we have to offer. Third of all, like Chris said, you're preserving yourself for people who actually are willing to listen to you. And fourth of all, it's ridiculous. You have to just acknowledge that in this day and age, we are still absurdly biased. Absurdly biased against women, against people with different skin color, people with accents. It happens. There, it exists. So let's move on now. What can we do in this environment to make the most of what we've got? We're biased against, short guys with glasses who walk in to play leading men. What can I do with it? Well, here's what I can do. And after eventually, you'll make progress. And I ain't saying it's fair.
No, and I mean, and I would say that too, that's been my
Right.
experience. I mean, I'm a full professor who's leadership position, so, you know, clearly.
Exactly.
You can.
And
Convince people that I'm worthy, but I just find it very, it's still a challenge.
It is.
And you know the one thing, and Chris talked about, you talked about self-preservation. One of the things that's worked for me is really thinking, hey, I don't give a damn. You know, and the truth is, you are an expert. You're a full professor. You know what you're doing. Don't give a damn about those people who have a bias. It's not your job to convince them.
There's a strange, Brian brings up a really powerful point, and I refer to it as cultivated indifference. You care deeply about these interactions and how they come out beforehand. That informs your preparation, your attitude, the reason why you're here. While they're going on, you don't really care. You can't care. You care about yourself, about your point, and the fact that you're connecting, but you can't make the success of the interaction dependent on how they take it. But you can focus on, I've got this fantastic point, and I'm going to do the best I can to communicate it to you, and if you don't care, it's your loss. So there's a very strange callousness that comes in that is a shift away from the outcome and more to the process. You deeply want to get funded, you want the job, but the minute that you're like, oh, it's really important that you hire me, it's, I really need this job, oh, Gil needs the knives, you know, I mean, the minute that happens, I mean, whoa, this guy's desperate, let's get away. Or, you know, someone gets real defensive, like, you know, why won't you listen to me? I'm right and you're wrong. And then, oh boy. So there is a deafness to it that's difficult to balance, but it's possible. There's a great set of studies that actually were celebrated, discredited, and then celebrated again, having to do with face-to-face interaction, overcoming biases when it comes to attitudes about abortion and gay marriage. And they actually found out that they faked their data or made fundamental mistakes. But then they went back and redid the study, and they actually came out with similar results, which no one will listen to because they only remember the first study. But this is a real and unconscious bias. I do a lot of continuing legal education, and unconscious bias is a fascinating topic. And that is deeply ingrained bias in how we react to words and pictures and just what you're saying. And they did show that they could move some of that bias in a constructive direction the more that they understood the stories, the more that they understood. They had people watch films about two cultures, and they had movement on the unconscious bias in a productive way. So, makes sense. Thank you. It's very productive. So, I've covered why I believe face-to-face interactions are so powerful, because it taps into that system 1 and 2 in a way that's quite unique, uniquely powerful and uniquely unconscious for us. And I've just talked about the 3x of connection when it comes to relation. Okay, so relation experience. The last is I want to talk about how we change that. Or actually, before I leave that, I have here reminded that these are some of the conclusions that I was talking about. Trust is the beneficial connection between two people, that you are with me, that you are, we are of the same interest and you could do something about it. And confidence is the perception that you know what you're talking about, that you understand your idea, and even though you understand it, you might not sound like you understand it. And the last is impact. What we're talking about is that stickiness of the idea. So how do you get better at something? Well, Anders Ericsson made a career of studying how people get better. Musicians, athletes, artists. And he was made famous, or some say infamous, by Malcolm Gladwell in, what was his book? Outliers? I think it was Outliers. The 10,000 hour rule. Malcolm Gladwell essentially said, if you practice for 10,000 hours, you're a master. And people said, that's not true. I've been swinging a golf club for 10,000 hours and I'm not a master. And Anders Ericsson, I believe, was driven to finally partner with Robert Poole here and write his book. He'd been publishing papers for 40 years. And in the book, he makes a whole chapter. He says, okay, 10,000 hours is a number that I quoted in a study about virtuoso violin players. But it's a specific kind of practice. So I want to talk about that and focus that. So let's look, first of all, at the process he talked about. The first of the three stages of developing any skill is understanding how the behavior is ideally executed, having an accurate mental model. This is how a ground stroke in tennis, this is how your arm moves. You need to understand that first. Second, that leads to some kind of practice, and we'll return to that in a little bit. And the third stage is some kind of objective informed feedback. So you understand, this is how a ground stroke is supposed to go. You go up, you practice, and you go like this. And then someone says, you threw your arm down in a crazy wildlife manner that was not in keeping with the mental model. And you say, oh, my bad. And then you go back. And sometimes you do this, and you're like, I fixed it, didn't I? And they say, no, you didn't. Let's look at the video. I didn't know I was doing that. That is the accurate process. And the practice itself has to be very specific. Okay? So mental model, practice, feedback, compare it to the mental model. So the types of practice, the first stage of practice is that you don't practice at all. Well, and this describes, we laugh, this describes a condition that can be described as, this describes a condition of unconscious incompetency. You basically don't know how awful you are at something. And it happens all the time. And in fact, it happens mostly in public speaking in the terms of ums. Did you know you said 37 times? I did not! You lie! Well, here, I'll just play the video back and we can count them together. So that you don't even know what it is that you're doing. You know, I'm playing tennis and like, why is the ball going there? I don't know what I'm doing. And that's system one. System one's taking over and it's like, hey, we got this. You just throw your racket down like that. Not allowing any participation of a more deliberate process. So the first stage is naive practice where you're like, okay, I know I'm not doing it right. Okay? I need to fix it. Then you enter this stage of conscious incompetency or conscious inefficiency. Okay, you're like, okay, I know I'm not the best tennis player, so I need to practice. So throw some of those balls at me and I'll just whack at them. And you don't know really how to direct that effort. That's the second stage, purposeful. You understand that a ground stroke goes from low to high. Oh, okay, that's what I should be doing. So you've gone from no practice to just hitting the ball to actually trying to do something. And this is very common. I played basketball through college, and you don't practice, you're not going to get any good. And people say, you stink, and you're like, oh, I'm consciously incompetent. So you go out and you play pickup ball. And then you go to some basketball clinics, and they teach you a few things about how you're supposed to keep your arm in when you shoot and all these things. And then you have something to guide your practice by. But that's not enough, because we can fall into these habits, and we don't have the capacity to shape and isolate a specific aspect. Deliberate practice picks one small aspect of that behavior and focuses on it and measures it back again. And so it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice leads to mastery, according to Anders Ericsson. And so that is what we try to do through our process, is help facilitate deliberate practice. Having a coach, an outside observer, is one of the critical ingredients to this, because you remove your biases, you remove yourself. You can duplicate this to a degree with videotape or some kind of recording to look at yourself outside as other people see you. Does that make sense? So we have gone through the relational aspect, which is the three acts, the experience, which is the power of interpersonal experience, and finally the development. And that is the basis of our approach. It is an effective way to describe what we do on a day-to-day basis in our acting profession. It's an equally good descriptor of what I do when I represent clients in the courtroom, in immigration court. It's the same process. I take a complex message, my client's case. I try to distill it down in a way where the judge will see me as a competent, prepared person that they'll listen to, so establish some kind of relationship, make my point very clearly so it will stick with them so that they'll rule in my favor. And I believe it's a useful way to look at the work that you do. Does anyone have any questions about that? Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
When you are trying to improve yourself and you give yourself a suggestion or somebody else give you a suggestion, and you know for sure it's right and you have to improve in that sense, and you try to improve but you get worse.
Mm-hmm.
How can you improve yourself, regardless you know it's the right direction, but the right direction is wrong. To go.
I can address that.
It sounds like the trough of despair. Were you really? Yeah.
So yeah, we call it the trough of despair.
Want to draw it for him? Or I'll draw it and you talk.
That's all right. It's really the productivity trough. Yeah, we can draw it up there.
I love drawing.
Yeah. It's amazing that Chris has stayed this far away from the whiteboard this long, actually. What we typically find, one of the things that I do is I teach ballroom and Latin dance. And one of the very, very clearly this happens all the time, the productivity trough. So I'll have somebody start by just walking, really, just walking. And then I'll say, oh, you're gonna walk backwards, and now walk sideways, good. And then I'll have them do a box step, and that's pretty easy. And then I start to give them just a little bit of correction, and all of a sudden what happens is they can't walk. And, well, hold on a second, what happened here, right? And it becomes awkward just to walk. And what's happening is you're trying to what's the word, consolidate, bring together various objectives at the same time. It's similar to thinking fast and slow. Part of your brain goes, I know how to walk, and the other part of it is going, well, but he said to do it more smoothly. There you go, that's more smoothly, right? And what I find with students, and this is whether I'm working with kids or professionals like yourselves, ballroom and Latin students, is that the key to making this work, I was just talking about this with somebody else yesterday, the key to making this work is, who was talking about focus? I think you were talking about staying focused, right? And being present. It really comes down to that, staying focused, being present on the immediate situation, but as well, staying focused on your objective. What is the goal at the end? I want to be able to project my voice to the end of a large room. Okay, so that's my objective. And every time I do that, I start here and I get tense and I can't do that. So, okay, I'm getting frustrated. Okay, hang on. I got to incorporate the exercises the director said, so I have to ground myself, take a deeper breath, relax, and then project my voice, and then I can contract again. And, okay, hang on, this isn't working. But what will drive me to continue practicing, what will allow me to get through that trough, is the knowledge that eventually I'm going to get there. Yes, it's going to be rough. And really, you should assume that anytime you embark on any new endeavor, whether it's physical or mental, performative, any kind of new endeavor, you're going to get worse for a little bit. That's natural. That happens. Nobody gets better on a linear, straight linear path. We take a dive, and then we start to get better.
So, and this is in corporate world, the trough of productivity is key for teams, and you can expect if you want to move your productivity from here to here, or to go to the standard, what happens is you'll take a hit and it will get worse because you're wrecking things that have been serving you well in an effort to put them back together. So you'll go down here and then you'll come up. And it's this area here that you're describing like it's getting worse. Why did it even try? Well, the first thing is to understand that that's okay, but you need to stick with it until you turn that corner. And far too often, because there's so much misunderstanding or, quite honestly, pain when it comes to working on how you communicate, people are very reluctant to embark on this downward slope. Before we go further...
well, we can maybe skip it, but...
sure.
Skip it, yeah.
Skip the seat?
Yeah. I think because we're pushing time and we're rolling along fine here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I will also say that one of the reasons that you take that initial plunge is because you've now developed an awareness of you become consciously incompetent. It's great to walk through the world unconsciously incompetent. All is good. Somebody says, you walk with a limp. What? Oh crap, I walk with a limp? Now all of a sudden all you're thinking about is I walk with a limp, right? So that's part of the pain right there. Here's a simple exercise that you all can take with you today, and then we'll see we'll do an experiment. When you come back in a month, we'll see what happens. Right now, we all feel in our bodies that we have decent posture. But now, just having said that, I screwed things up for you. Because the truth is, we don't really have that posture that's that good. So what I want you to do is just seated right there, I just want you to improve your posture. Okay? Just lift yourself up a little bit. Let the air flow a little more. Right? Let the chi go. That's right. All right. Now, all of a sudden, we're all now aware of our posture. And so here's the experiment. I want you, between now and next month, if you remember, you can remind each other when you're passing one another in the halls, to just, when you're walking, just try to make that amount of difference. From this, which is our normal, pensive, sedentary lifestyle kind of walking to this, which is an energetic, flowing form of, I'm getting kicked off the stage here. No, it's okay, you're doing great. She's getting ready. All right. I want you to just try that while you're walking down the hall. Even if you're just walking from the bedroom to the bathroom, see if you can start doing this, all right? And what'll happen is, what's your name?
Andrea.
Andrea. What'll happen is, at first, you're gonna start to, when you're just sitting there, you're gonna, God, I have horrible posture, right? If you remember to do this. You'll start to feel how bad your posture is. And eventually, what'll happen is you'll develop a habit. And Chris talked about that earlier. Anything that we work on in these seminars can be developed, can become habitual, so that you do reach a stage of unconscious competence, where you don't have to think about it, it's habitual. As a professional dancer for 25 years, I tend to walk around with pretty good posture, but even still, sometimes I'll find myself slouching, or especially at the computer, right? And I have to remind myself. It becomes easier and easier. So let's try this experiment, yeah? We'll see how your posture is. You're gonna feel great in a month. It's gonna be fantastic.
You look better already. A lot more attentive than when I was talking to you. So, speaking of which, we're now going to shift to what is going to be the template for the rest of the seminars. We're going to, all the rest of the seminars will not have this kind of talky diagram drawing. It'll be focused on volunteers like Sylvia, experienced speakers like Sylvia, and postdocs and other people who are not as experienced. And they're going to come up, as Sylvia's going to come up, and share a couple minutes of something that they present in everyday life. So something real. We're going to check in with the audience, and then we're going to give some feedback to the volunteer. And then we're going to take some of those exercises and let you try them. Okay? So we're going to do that today. And then for the next 5 Mondays, it turns out to be the first Monday of every month, with the exception of January, because of the holidays, you know, we'll be doing that. So I'd like to invite Sylvia up, and I don't know if you have to do anything else, but I'm sure you can do it.
I'm just gonna cross over here.
So, I didn't really know what to prepare for today, so I just thought I would give a little overview of what we do in my lab. I'm Sylvia Balbo. I'm part of the Cancer Center, and I have an appointment also in the School of Public Health in the Division of Environmental Health Sciences. And I'm just going to give a little overview of what we're doing in the lab, which is located upstairs on the 2nd floor. So this is a kind of a difficult title, DNA Atomics for the investigation of the exposome. Maybe we'll have to work on this one. So what we're trying to do is elucidating DNA damage at a molecular level, so really try to understand what happens when DNA is damaged by specific exposures, and try with mass spectrometry to identify the modifications, the chemical modifications that are happening at the DNA level. And the reason for doing this is that we know that chemical carcinogenesis is based on the fact that when we have specific exposures that either are activated through metabolism or can directly interact with DNA, we can have DNA damaging events and covalent link of these chemicals to DNA, which can lead to modifications. And if these modifications are not repaired, these can lead to genetic changes, ultimately potentially leading to mutations and then to cancer. And so just to give you an example of how this works, this is something that is evident in people that are affected by xeroderma pigmentosum. This is a genetic disease that does not allow these individuals to repair the DNA damage. And so when they have UV that induces some changes in the DNA, the lack of the repair mechanism leads to dry skin and changes in the coloration, and ultimately leads to skin cancer. Another example that maybe you have heard of is aflatoxin, and this is a specific toxin that is present in molds and cereals. And when we are exposed to this toxin, we have specific modifications of the DNA that can lead to mutations that then are found in hepatocellular carcinomas that are typically coming from the exposure to this chemical. So just two examples to show really the key role of DNA damage in specifically this type of development of cancer. So the idea here is that we're looking at one exposure, specific modifications, and then ultimately an effect and an endpoint that is cancer. But we're trying to move a little bit further on this and try to look at all the different exposures at once. So what if, instead of just looking at one specific exposure at a time, we can actually look at all the different exposures that our body's facing and see how these are related to DNA damage and therefore are potentially related to cancer. So the reason we can do this is because we have instruments, mass spectrometers, that now have been developed for proteomics and metabolomics, so they are highly sensitive and they have high resolution capability, and these allow us to really develop methodologies that are able to screen rather than to focus on one specific modification or one specific analyte. We now have the ability to screen for multiple analytes at the same time. And so in my lab, we've started looking at the fact that when we have a modification of DNA and we hydrolyze the DNA, we have common features that are still going to be common to all these modifications, and those are the base, one of the 4 bases in the DNA, and then the presence of the deoxyribose. And so the instruments that we use are programmed to look for any analyte that is characterized by the fragmentation in the mass spectrometer that releases the deoxyribose. And also, we added to that the fact that if we have instead a modification that doesn't have the deoxyribose because the modification has led to an unstable DNA adduct, then we can look for anything that is losing a base. And so by looking at these key features that are lost in the analytical process, we're able to look and scan for all the DNA modifications that are coming from that specific DNA sample. So this is just a representation of the instrument, how it works, the mass spectrometer. We have an ion source, so first we get our DNA from the cellular model or the animal model or the human model that we have been looking at. We hydrolyze the DNA and then we look for these modifications. And the way that we do this is by generating ions in the ion source once the signal is injected in the mass spectrometer. We have a full scan where we look at the accurate mass of that specific analyte, and then we select those analytes that, when fragmented, are showing that specific loss of the deoxyribose or the base. And so by looking at anything that is characterized by that loss, then we are able to characterize and identify DNA adducts that then are fragmented further so that we can collect more information on how their structure looks like. So this is the output that we get. We get a full scan. So the first part of the analysis gets this chromatogram that is quite messy. And out of this mess, we can actually take out the ions that are characterized by the signal that shows that there is actually loss detected of the base or the sugar, and that has triggered a further fragmentation event where, as I said, we collect and we gain further information on the structure of the DNA modification. So the applications that we are trying to pursue with this specific methodology are to try to understand and decode DNA damage that is induced by exogenous exposures. We're thinking about how alcohol, how tobacco, how other genotoxins that we are exposed to that are coming from the diet or the environment are actually leading to DNA damage, what kind of DNA damage, and then ultimately if any of this damage is related to cancer. We're looking at DNA damage that is induced by endogenous exposures, and so exposures that are coming from our own metabolism, from our own physiological processes that may be leading to a disease. You can think of, for instance, inflammation. And then we're using this methodology also to look into drug development and personalized medicine approaches, looking at those therapies that are specifically using the alkylation or the reaction with DNA as their mechanism of action to then try to inform what kind of interactions they are resulting with, and then ultimately if they can be improved reduced in order to have more of an individualized and more finely tuned therapy. So just a few examples. The first one is, as I said, trying to understand effects from exogenous exposures. We're looking at tobacco-specific nitrosamines. We're using animal models to then expose them to specific chemicals, carcinogens that are present in tobacco. We look at the DNA extracted from the organs of these animals, and then we look at with our methodology at all the DNA adducts that are formed. We have models that are models of inflammation. So as I said, we're looking at the endogenous processes that are leading to DNA damage. And this is a model where we use LPS, which is a substance that is inducing inflammation. And so we're looking at any DNA damage that is coming from that process, lipid peroxidation or oxidative stress. And then we also have work that is focusing, as I said, on more specifically alkylating drugs. And so drugs that are using the interaction with DNA as their mechanism of action, characterize their interaction with the DNA, and ultimately see how that can be used to predict efficacy or toxicity of these drugs. And from this last example, I'm just going to show you some of the results that we have got from testing an experimental drug, PR104A, on DNA. And we have identified several DNA addicts, so just to show the number of potential candidates that can be used as biomarkers for this type of work. This is a very complex slide. What I really like to show here is just the complexity, the amount of information that comes from this work, and then the fact that we can then select specific biomarkers from that list to then look at cellular level, again, how the levels of these markers are correlating with cytotoxicity or ultimately with efficacy. So this is just a little overview of some of the work that we're doing. But in summary, our lab has a comprehensive high-resolution mass spectrometry, atomic-based mass spectrometry. It's too long, I have to change. Our method is a high-resolution mass spectrometry-based DNA atomic approach that allows to characterize DNA damage. As I said, we're working on characterizing DNA damage from different sources and also to investigate the efficacy of specific drugs. And we have some preliminary results that are confirming our ability to use this approach to detect both multiple known expect DNA addicts at the same time. So we can do that, and we can confirm their identity, looking at how they compare with standards and with things that have been already described. But then also this methodology allows us, because it is an unbiased approach, to really look for unknown DNA addicts and potentially modifications that have not been described previously. And so overall, I think we have a promising tool for the investigation of DNA damaging effect of the exposome intended as, again, the overall idea that we are exposed to different things, different lifestyle factors, things in the diet, environmental pollutants, and so on, and we can actually have a method to look at how these are affecting the DNA all at once. And this is work that is done by people in my lab and then through several collaborations, and that's it.
Thank you very much. Okay, you can have a seat, I think. So what I wanted to do is check in with you, the audience. How do you think it went? What are some things that you thought were well done by Sylvia? And there are quite a few of them.
It was very clear.
It was.
It was very confidently. It was a very complex topic that she broke down. I found, but I'm sort of very accustomed. I'm a colleague.
Yeah.
But I think,
Okay.
and somebody who also is challenged by talking about these very complex issues, I think she speaks in a simplified way.
Great. Great. Excellent. Yes, I agree. Clear, authoritative. Yes.
I thought she did something maybe unconsciously that actually helped, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I don't know, she said who she was, and then she said, I work upstairs. And for me, that was a relational tool, the 100 millisecond. Because otherwise, like, I haven't met you before. And otherwise, you're just someone from far away. But suddenly, you're one of me.
Great,
And,
yeah.
maybe that was conscious, maybe unconscious, but
Sure.
it's actually affected my
she did a number of other things, quite subtle, in the opening that we encourage from a best practice standpoint, acknowledging just, this is a complex slide, or I didn't know what to say, so I'm going to try the best. And all of a sudden, we're like, okay. I mean, she's opening herself up. She's letting us know where she's coming from. As opposed to, this is what I'm going to tell, and this is a great ideas, and you know, there's a lot to it. So that's a good point. Yes?
She really made a broad applicability of her research.
Mm.
And so I'm an immunologist, I do this, but
Yeah.
I already see how what she does can
Great.
apply to what I do.
Wonderful. And again, remember that in that little diagram I was showing you, it's sparking the imagination of the audience so that they can take it with them, and that's a real value. Really good point, yes.
I have the point of view of someone who would like to give a talk like this,
Yeah.
and my personal issue, and I have to give any kind of talk like this, is that I don't want to underestimate the audience. So I think she is really great,
Yes.
and giving the possibility to everybody
Yes.
to understand something complex
Yes.
with precise sentences, right at the point, so everybody can be on the same page in few slides. So that's something
Yeah.
that I try to do every time, and I fail, but I think it's what I need like to improve. So that's
Good.
my feeling.
Agreed. And that is a real balancing act to not talk down to your audience and yet leave it accessible to people who are advanced. It's a bell curve of any audience. You have people on one end, and you got to take care of the people in the middle and also the people at the ends. But I agree, and it's tough, and you do a very, very good job. Anyone else? Yes.
I like the pacing in
Yeah,
terms of like
quite nice, yes.
the way that the timing in which she spoke.
Agreed.
It wasn't too fast, it
No.
wasn't too slow.
No, there's a confidence, you felt like you were really talking to a real human being, which is hard to do from up here. So that's a good point, yes?
I found the structure of the presentation really compelling, how it
Yeah.
started with like a general overview of the
Yeah.
need in the research, a general
Right.
overview of the solutions, deep diving into specifics, and then bringing that back up to the overview.
Very nice. Oftentimes, the structure is transparent and tends to give a feeling, but for some, it's very overt and at the same time has a beneficial. I like knowing where we're going and what is being said, and I agree that it was well thought out, and yet at the same time, it wasn't too noticeable or too rigid, so that's good. Wonderful. So a lot of things, and this is what, I mean, Mark spoke last year, and we've had other advanced speakers who do it, and it's always fun, because one of the things that Brian is such a proponent of is this thing called beginner's mind, is that we always have something to learn, and that's a real skill in and of itself. And so I enjoy watching other communicators and trying to adopt that, like, wow, she's doing all these great things. So that's always fun when we have more experienced people. And then people who are not as experienced also bring the same set of things they're doing well and things that they could be improved upon. And what I would like to do, so I've been back there, and there isn't much to constructively comment on Sylvia. There really isn't, but it's that, you know, that little percent that you're going to work a long time towards improving upon. And there are very small things, and there is something small that in day-to-day conversations, about 7% of a casual conversation is what's called disfluent, is where someone will say, I want to go over to the restroom. I mean, and that happens, and we're very attuned to it, and that's not a problem. When you're up here, and you rise to the 7% level, that impression will be conversational. If it goes beyond that, you have the possibility of it undercutting some of the confidence, because it's very natural when you're up here and nervous that there are more disfluencies. And it's not realistic to eliminate them entirely, but a lack of disfluencies indicates a great deal of precision and confidence. Because one of the greatest ways to cure them is to simply pause and wait for the word to come to you. And that takes a lot of confidence. And it's something that can be done. And so Sylvia had, I'm going to review, one of the things that I've adopted is a fanatic appetite for metrics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Sylvia's talk, I'm going to run it through a machine transcription, and I'm going to look at the percent level, because I measured about 50 disfluencies, and I'm going to see at what percentage. My hunch is that it's around the 7%. It might be a little bit over, but it's something that's very easy. She has so many wonderful things going on that she can work on as she keeps the rest of the things at that high level. But there's some small tactics that we can work with her on. And I actually would like to invite you to come up and give the opening of your talk, the first slide. And if you come to a point you're consciously wondering what's next or what to say, I encourage you simply to stop. Okay, you want to try that? Can you? Just the opening. And in fact, I don't even care where you can do the ending or wherever, just pick a slide. And I want you just to see what difference it may make to have that kind of explicit permission to pause if you don't know what to say or if you're hesitating. And you can do any slide, it doesn't matter.
Should I go for the summary?
Yeah, perfect, perfect.
Okay.
Not the summary.
Yes. Do the summary. My kids are chanting a lot. I was expecting them all to chant. Summary.
So actually this is hard because one of the things that I learned last time was that the summary or the last part should be as memorized as much as the beginning, and I never do it. I haven't done it, and so this is a hard one.
Well,
the summary is a hard one.
We can talk about that. Memorization gives you consistency and a heightened efficiency because you've crafted the words before, but it's really hard to balance with a genuineness, and especially if you know you're not saying what you're supposed to say, it can throw you off. And so we try to balance that with certain points or sentences that can be memorized and work up to that. But the goal is absolutely right on, which is you try to make that as clear as possible. So just give it your best, and if there are any points, just feel free to stop. It feels like a long time, but it's actually not for an audience. And so just give it a try.
Okay. All right, so in summary, our lab has a comprehensive high-resolution mass spectrometry-based DNA allotomic approach that allows to characterize DNA damage from exogenous exposure, endogenous exposure, and also allows us to
You're aware of it.
It's conscious incompetency at this point.
to look into improve the use of specific drugs in chemotherapy. And our preliminary, that's not how I should.
No, do you want to start over?
Very hard.
No, you did fine. You did fine. This is that productivity trough where it's like you ask you to do something and just act natural, just do this. And you're like, I can't walk anymore, like Brian said. I was standing up here, I don't know if you heard me, but I was saying a lot because I was counting the ums. And so I was descending down into that trough as well. And so this new muscle is already evident because Sylvia was catching herself. Were you aware before you said 50 times?
No.
No, okay. So were you aware? No, a little bit maybe, but not 50, and so it disappears, but maybe at points. And all something like this, again, we're talking about a very, very fine level of accomplishment, but it's still something that can be accomplished. But the first stage is making yourself aware of it, which you are right now. So maybe continue on as best you can, and don't worry about it at all. Don't even think about it anymore. So just do the rest of it. Don't pay any mind to the 50 people watching you.
Okay, so our preliminary results are confirming our ability to detect multiple known expected DNA adducts, so the ones that are coming from exposures that have been studied before and modifications that have been characterized and analyzed before, for which we have standards or we have literature that we can refer to. And then our methodology has also proven to be a good tool to screen for unknown DNA adducts. So DNA modifications that we are not aware of that now with this unbiased screening methodology we can potentially discover. And so our DNA allotomics methodology is a promising tool for the investigation of the DNA damaging effects of the exposome. And so really what we're trying to get to is developing a methodology to look at the DNA damage that comes from all these different exposures at once.
Wonderful. Applause, please. And the goal with this is to try. And the goal is to engage in the attempt to improve, and it will take some time. But even then, there was an effect on her delivery. And with deliberate practice, we would examine whether the total is where we wanted it and how we would want to continue to approach it. I counted 5 ums in that time period, and then we would compare it. And it's not going to happen right away, especially something like this. So it's a process, and this is how it begins. We did engage in a very small group exercise, and that was your posture. Normally, how's everyone's posture doing? Pretty good, pretty good. Normally what we will do is we will work with somebody up, and then we would work perhaps in small groups on a small disfluency exercise that you could do in pairs. We would break someone into, or break the group into maybe 4 groups of pairs, and you would engage in that. And so that's something that we would do in subsequent seminars, but today we're almost out of time, so we're going to have to put that off, and you're going to have to work on your posture as your group exercise. But our commitment is to hold out practical tips and techniques, and one of the best ways to make it practical is to invite you to participate like Sylvia has, or to participate in small groups so that you have a chance to feel what it's like. And I think Sylvia has shared that it's hard, but at the same time, I want you to feel like, oh, I can do this. And that's really critical. When we work with groups like this, we usually lead them through an experience where they feel the changes. In watching somebody perform something, they're like, wow, yeah, I feel what that is like when it's done well. And then also to feel what it's like when they do something well, or if something's not done right, how that feels. Then we add on the tactics, if that makes sense, okay? So thank you very much. It's been a different seminar opening, but I appreciate your patience, and I really appreciate your participation, and we strongly encourage you to come back. We're going to, the next one will be December 4th, is that correct? December 4th, and it's the first Monday after that, starting after that in February. So February, March, April, and then all the way to May.
And let me just throw in, let me encourage you. I know that Chris asked how many of you want to get better. Everybody raise your hands. Andrea, I know you've been talking specifically about this. I highly encourage you to take that first step off the trough of despair so that you can slide back up and actually improve. And take advantage of this. You can talk to the colleagues, Sylvia, Mark, others who have taken part in this, and ask them if it's worth it. It is. It is hard. It is hard. It is hard. But it's worth it. So I highly encourage you. We always, Alex tends to run up against trouble sometimes finding volunteers. Throw yourselves into it. You can't go wrong. Even if you have 3 minutes of a presentation to give us, that's great. You can improve based on that.
And we'll stick around if you have any questions. I know you're very busy, and we've already gone over in our first session, sorry. But thank you very much. Take care. See you next month.